We don't want to start without them. We're gonna do this. All right.
Do this.
We ready?
Get this party
Great.
started.
Get the party started.
Party started.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. Hello out there virtually. My name is Amanda Hedon Murphy, and I'm a curator and the resident artist and collector liaison at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Arlington. It's our pleasure tonight to be in conversation, my pleasure, to be in conversation with Negar Ahkami, who actually used to be a resident artist at the museum. So many of you may be familiar with her work if you're tuning in virtually from her time with us at the museum. In any rate, we are at the Innovation Studio, which is our second location at Amazon's HQ2. And tonight we're going to be talking about Negar's newest work, some of which is behind me. If you see that glowing dance platform, that is what we're going to be talking about tonight. I thought for those of you who are tuning in person that I would address the images that we have right here, which I think will make a lot of sense as we're talking. They're paintings that contextualize like the influence of the dance floor on what you're seeing behind us. We'll talk about that in a little more detail. If you're tuning in virtually, you get to see them in real time as we talk about these topics. So I'm going to go ahead and read an intro for Negar and this project, and we'll get started. Negar Ahkami makes dynamic, ornate paintings and interactive multimedia works that are inspired by artistic influences of her family's Iranian heritage and by the interconnectivity and shared humanity of these influences. Ahkami holds an MFA from the School of Visual Arts, New York, and a BA from Columbia University. She's exhibited at museums and galleries nationally and internationally, including the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, the North Carolina Museum of Art, the Bronx Museum of Art, and the Walters Art Museum. Her work is in the collections of the New Britain Museum of American Art, DePaul University Art Museum, Wellington Management Company, and others. Ahkami's residency here focuses on the dance floor, a motif that Ahkami has used repeatedly throughout her work. The dance floor featured in Ahkami's solo show After Winter Must Come Spring at MoCA Arlington, then called Arlington Art Center in 2018, where Ahkami made her very first dance platform, and we see an example of that back here. That dance platform became a blueprint of source for the work that Ahkami is actualizing here. Yalgo Rhythm is an installation of interactive dance platforms inspired by the dynamic patterns in Persian architecture and the exuberant dancing at Iranian American gatherings from her youth. Drawing on her cultural heritage, Negar explores themes of hospitality, universal connection, resilience, hope, playfulness, and release. She invites you to feel the movement and dance as you feel inspired on an event on February 12th of this year at 6:30 p.m., so we're going to plug that again. But if you want to see how this project has developed and come and maybe shake it a little bit on the 12th, that's what we invite you to do. So welcome. All right, Negar, so you talked with me about how revelry, partying, and dance are deeply ingrained in Iranian culture. And you talked about specifically Iranian Nowruz celebrations, the Persian New Year. And the parties that your parents threw when you were growing up in New Jersey for members of the Iranian diaspora. And I feel like that's a good place for us to start this conversation. So can you talk about those parties and the influence they had on you?
I will thank you for that introduction, Amanda, and thank you all for this great gathering. I will say first off the bat that I can't say that I represent Iranian culture because I don't. I mean, I am very much an Iranian American, first generation American. My parents immigrated and they came in the 60s before I was born. And there weren't a lot of Iranians here when I was growing up in the 70s, and all our family, pretty much, most of it, was in Iran, and so there was a lot of back and forth, let's just say. I had a lot of exposure to the revelry of Iranians as a child, going to Iran, visiting family, seeing Gugush in like a nightclub with my parents. I mean, just there was a lot of disco, let's say, in the 70s, and glamour, and just convivial, like these pictures of my mom, like dancing, and like just awesome. I mean, just, and so it wasn't a surprise to me. The revolution and what happened afterwards was a complete shock. I had just been in Iran with my family, and then the news unfolded, and in our living room in New Jersey, and it was like a completely different Iran than the one I had just been to a few months prior. And over the years, the diaspora grew and grew. And, you know, I was in the suburbs of New York City, and my parents really were like a welcoming committee to so many Iranians, not just family, but just this extended community that was shaping. And they, you know, helped create this organization that was like a cultural organization. And they would set up these parties, I mean, with their friends that were big sort of parquet dance floors and hotel ballrooms. I mean, I feel like the newer generation of Iranian immigrants are so hip and young, and like in New York City, like when I was growing up, you would not hear Farsi Persian speaking on the subway at all. I felt nobody could guess what I was. It was always, you know, assumed that I was from all these other cultural backgrounds, but oh, that's the Amazon. Alexa
oh, Alexa.
I probably should unplug it. But so, sorry, the gatherings are so much more hip. I feel like these younger generation, they organize these gatherings that are dance parties that are in clubs and in amazing spaces. These were dorky sort of hotel ballrooms in the suburbs. And they were, you know, completely secular. You wouldn't know what religion people are. There was probably a mix of religions, of people's backgrounds, and they were, you know, you never know. The people may have had different politics, like that were, and these were people that were displaced from their homeland, that were sad, you know, devastated, traumatized to leave a place that they never planned on leaving, right? And you could. I was a very sensitive child, and I'm the kind of person that feels people's emotions. You know, if someone's mad or someone's upset, I could feel it. And I remember being very young and feeling a palpable sadness on these beautiful faces, these heavily made up women, and yet the dance floors would be completely packed. With people of all ages, you know, the man with the cane, the women in just glamorous clothes, and this was, you know, there was a constant influx of people coming from Iran. So even though I was this American child, I felt like in the 80s and 90s, watching this growing diaspora, even though I was an observer, and it was really my parents. It was my parents' community, not mine. I really felt, you know, this palpable, you know, trauma and emotion, and this holding on to something and creating these gatherings in order to build a new and, you know, life, and to create a source of pride for the next generation, which didn't necessarily work because I was an awkward teenager not wanting to be looked at, and oh, look how big Negar is getting, and just all that. But it took years for me to appreciate how special that was, and what those parties meant for a lot of people that were new and that didn't know people in the area and that were just settling in. And so, yeah.
And I think we also talked about how many Americans may not be familiar with that facet of Iranian culture because we are fed such a different story.
Precisely.
Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later in the talk.
No, but that's exactly, that's it.
So you attended these parties and you observed these parties too.
And so I danced at the parties.
And you danced. And you danced.
I did.
But people know you primarily, I'd say, as a painter. And the dance floor as a motif has appeared in your paintings now for quite some time. So I wonder if you could talk about when you began to employ it and why.
Yeah. I would say at the outset of my project as an artist, when I quit my job, 2001, really. But even before that, in the late 90s, I was mining the dance floor in like a Persian version of the dance floor in some works. So it's always been there. And for me, because I such a big source of angst for me that moved me to actually want to make art, as sort of a I just felt like everything that I was seeing in our news media, but then also even in the art world, was reinforcing of such black and white views of Iranians, and that was really what it felt like for me, you know, in the late 90s and early 2000s. And for me, the dance floor and the disco and the, you know, all of that imagery, the flamboyance, the maximalism, was really part of my project from the get-go, not because I'm personally a maximalist. I mean, yes, I do like bright colors. I dress like I did when I was 11, but I'm not like jewelry and not, you know, it's just I'm not a maximalist in this way that I associate with a lot of my culture, the glamour in my culture. But for me, that maximalism was evidence of the humanity, of it, the connectedness of the Iranians' connection to the world. This notion of Iranians as being so isolated and, you know, so other, and so, which that I grew up with was so, you know, I just remember rolling my eyes and just thinking, if only people, you know, if only the guy on the news that's talking about Iran and, you know, in this negative way and just equating the culture with the regime, like, if only they just came to the Nowruz parties, like, you wouldn't, you know, you maybe would have a different opinion. And it just, whatever you read in the newspaper for decades, I mean, I'm talking in the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s, was so not representative of that at all. You wouldn't know it. You, like you said, you wouldn't know that there's this dance floor loving culture. And so that just was something that I would put in my work from early on. But what I would say 2004, I kind of very explicitly made this satirical painting called Fat Ali Shah. Fat Ali Shah is a real, I mean, would you say he was a king? He was a king. He was a Qajar era king. Thank you. And, I mean, his portraits are, I mean, I used to just laugh at them because they were just kind of just this very, just like this huge beard. It's like all eyebrows and beard. And very sort of boastful kind of paintings of like Fat Ali Shah and all his jewels and these ostentatious like crowns and I mean just over the top like, and so there he is, Fat Ali Shah. And so I'm kind of teasing at this figure in that, and there was a big painting as well, and that was put in a show along with my sort of female disco imagery. My first kind of group show that was of real note, I would say, because it was reviewed twice in the New York Times, and Nicolene Thomas was in it, and Ivan Monforte and Shanique Smith and all these really good artists, Caleb Lindsay, and I felt very honored to be in there. I was actually a first year in grad school and had just gotten to grad school, and it was the show was Do You Think I'm Disco? And that was like that was my entryway into the art world in some ways. And so yeah, for me it was a subversion, a playful subversion of what felt like an oppressive kind of stereotype that I felt oppressed by, just not just in the news and in the art world, but just on a daily basis. I mean, even though I'm completely American, I always had to explain like where I was really from, and then that always resulted in conversations that where I sometimes actually, even just in studio visits, felt disbelieved by people in the art world about the very premise of flamboyance. That's how entrenched the stereotypes were, based on the photographs of women in chador that were all you ever saw for so long in our news. And so so that sort of felt like gaslighting almost, like you don't know, you're really American, you never lived there, like you don't know the culture, was the kind of response I would sometimes get. And so for me the dance floor imagery was just was a tribute to a culture that endures and that is colorful, it is exuberant, and humanity that's so connected that sorry, I'm rambling.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
And the dance floor feels like a real leveler too, right? Because everybody can join, and it's a place where everybody can lose themselves.
Exactly, and it is meant for everyone. So, of course, the aspect of this work it is absolutely intended for everyone, and the aspect of my work that's a tribute to a culture that I think is amazing and underrecognized is also a culture that is so connected, just even visually in terms of there's connections to so many other cultures within just the sphere of Persian art, and so I'm interested in those kinds of connections. Just intellectually, just the flow of ideas that goes in every direction, and but just the inclusivity, the welcome of the dance floor, and how people who feel most marginalized and who most understand pain, and know what to do on a dance floor, and how there can be such beautiful release in that kind of space and in movement, and joy as I just want, it's like a Valentine for people who understand that, of all backgrounds.
So you painted the dance floor from a very, very long time, and it repeatedly kind of showed up in your work. And then you had a moment, actually, at MoCA Arlington, then Arlington Art Center, in your solo show After Winter Must Come Spring in 2018. That was a place where you made one of your first dance platforms and displayed it.
Yeah.
And then you also had an accompanying Alexa, is she off? Okay. An accompanying Alexa Genie that played the soundtrack for that dance platform. And then you later created another Alexa Genie when you were a Janet and Walter Sondheim Prize finalist in Baltimore in 2019. So can you talk a little bit about those works, maybe addressing the examples that we have here that are also later iterations?
Yeah, I'll start with the genie named Alexa, since we're in Amazon, here in this Amazon context. My husband Bill, shout out to Bill. I'm always very frustrated with the phone. The phone has always been a source of frustration for me, and how much attention it takes. And I think I was really battling that kind of attention, listening to music on my phone, and how that sort of then draws you in to checking emails and doing these things, and how disruptive that is to the studio life. And he got me my very first Amazon Echo, and I just thought it was so incredible that I didn't have to touch anything, and that I could summon a song, anything that I wanted to listen to. It felt like a genie, I felt like and of course I love all things, Orientalism, or Orientalism is very fraught, right? But it's also quite magical, and it's a kind of it's a global art form that I feel like the art world should give more credit to this movement in U.S. obsession with Orientalism, which was a very real, lasted decades actually in popular culture and in the art world, but that's a whole other thing. But so I am very obsessed with Orientalist imagery, and I kind of reclaim it a lot. And but so I just for myself, I made my own made out of this epoxy clay resin, Alexa genie lamp, and kind of loosely inspired by Persian wine bowls, ancient vessels from 2000 BC that had these spouts, and it kind of looked like a teacup too. And and my first versions were, I don't have images of them here, but I did maybe 2 for myself. And what's hilarious about putting it in this bowl is that it creates kind of an echo chamber, so it amplifies the speaker more, and then you have to kind of lean into it like you're leaning into the lamp, the genie lamp. So so I made this kind of flowery language that's about the genie named Alexa, with a kind of Arabized kind of spelling of Alexa, and the vessel that we have here is from that I displayed at the Walter Museum, was inspired by a specific wine bowl that's in the Walters Museum's collection from Iran, that has this kind of bird-like spout, but then it's a hybrid of many different centuries of Persian pottery, but made from crafty materials like styrofoam and epoxy clay resin. So interacting with the dance platform right now.
Oh,
out there.
fantastic.
Well, we're just wondering what it is. So that's that, and yeah, no, just the putting that together with the dance platform. The first iteration of an actual interactive platform that I made, as you said, was in this 2018 solo show as part of my residency at Mocha Arlington, then called AAC, and that piece was not a whole dance floor because of the economy of means, right? So it was more of a platform, like bigger than this. Two people could get on that one, but generally it was one person would get on at a time, and it was riffing on a Persian carpet, like so it was I had a little crafty fringe on either end to make it sort of like a magic fly-in carpet, right? So again, another reclaiming of 1,001 Nights imagery, and so yeah, this notion of the dance floor is this tool of escape, escaping pain, escaping painful realities, right? That's what Fantastica from 1,001 Nights brings us, like kind of escapism, right? That was the appeal of that whole genre, and of course, the dance floor is that kind of escape too. Music is that escape. So it was a playful way to bring those things together, and in times that felt dark then, if things feel dark now, even darker now. But back then, I guess 2016, 2017, 28 is what I felt moved to give a gift to people and to create sort of an uplifting experience, which, that's where that, what that show did was demonstrated what it felt like to actually create this like relational aesthetics experience where people are in fact interacting with this thing, because I'm usually just a cave painter painting alone. That was really quite amazing to see people interacting with it for someone like me.
That's great.
That, yeah.
So this next question is a bit of a leap, but I think that we can sort of draw in a little bit of the art historical references that have been so influential for you. And particularly I'm thinking about architecture. Those of you who know Negar's work also know that there's been a continued engagement with tile work, Persian tile work, and also just architectural forms. And in your solo show, Le Kaftan, Le Turban, in 2022, there were spaces that these figures inhabited that were they were like whirling monumental arches and things that were tiled over. And I remember you saying that swirling feeling that you would get when you would encounter this architecture was something you were trying to recreate in the paintings for the figures. So I know you've mentioned this, and I wondered if there's a connection between that highly ornate architecture that you encountered in Iran as a young person and then on other trips that you've taken and the experience of losing yourself on a dance floor. And I wondered if you can talk about visually what the influences are there, but then also from a very embodied place, what is it like to encounter that kind of architecture and embellishment?
Yeah, I mean, it really just is incredible when you go into a Persian-style mosque, which has these beautiful domes. I mean, if you think of the Taj Mahal, I mean, that comes from that kind of architecture with its own genius layered onto it. These amazing domes, turquoise often, patterned, and the tile work is so intricate, and the colors are just so incredible, and there's so many different kinds of patterns, and with the utmost sophistication and detail. And when you go into these big spaces, it's not just the texture of the patterns, the texture of the tiles, because the tiles are shiny, but then there's matte moments, and then there's relief-like tiles, which is a whole other thing, which is a lot of my paintings are bas-relief. There's just the simultaneity of the patterns, geometric, floral, the Arabic calligraphy that is just so exquisite in itself, and just all of the different kinds of patterns happening at once it hits you in this visceral way that just it hits me right in the gut. And I think for me as an artistically, it was never about just like claiming the patterns as an identity thing. It was like I want to use that. That's like that feeling in the gut is an emotional feeling. It's like in the body, and I just wanted my art to have a feeling, and so sometimes the cacophony in the paintings is like pushed to an extreme to create this like emotional feeling. But with respect to the dance floor work, it's about the rhythmic experience. It's for me an entirely rhythmic experience. It's like that I really do equate with going to the clubs, the club. As a teenager, I would go, get, driven by these really lovely, like older kids to the city, and we would go out clubbing, and they weren't karting in the 80s, and we would go, and for me, I was not socially cool. Like I wasn't, like when you think of, like you hear about Chloe Sevigny going to the clubs as a teenager and, then becoming a film star, whatever, I didn't talk, like, I was like mime. And, it was a visual experience for me, and I was a huge fan of like Basquiat and Keith Haring and Kenny Scharf, and knowing these artists, were making art in the club and being there. Like that was like, it was a real artistic experience for me going in. But then also just, yes, loving dancing and just losing yourself on the floor and seeing people off in their own, the simultaneity of rhythms, happening, and this unified experience. Like that's how I feel when I'm in that space. The mosque architecture, can't explain it, but it's very similar. And so there's just for me it just connects. It's like it connects to the humanity, the exuberance of Persian culture and the humanity, like that's what I related to. And it's, of course the art would be rhythmic. The people, are amazing dancers. I'm sure it might, I'm not going to name names. There are some family members that don't dance as well as others, but it's, there's this, the mosques don't have images of people, right? It's, you do have a tradition of Persian painting that has figures, and they're very stylized, but that is Islamic architecture, right? You wouldn't have images of idols of people. It's just and an extension of that, like Persian literature, the Sufi poetry, which is such a big part of Iranian culture, and it's such a point of pride, and it's like a religion in and of itself, of people from all religious backgrounds that love Rumi and love Hafez and Sadi, and like there's this just this thematic thread of losing your ego, shedding the ego and becoming at one with the universe. I mean, that's what happens on the dance floor. I think it's like you get all dressed up, you put on this whole persona to go out, and then when you're out there, like if you really lose yourself to the music, you're doing that very thing, that the art is doing in those spaces.
Fantastic.
So,
like you transcend.
Yeah.
In the way that the architecture wants you to do.
So for me, it just goes together. Like it's just, to me, it's just like an obvious connection.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I can I totally see it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's really cool that increasingly it's not just depicting it, but also slowly you're inviting people to inhabit that with you and join in that experience.
Because I can't go to those spaces myself anymore. Although I got to go to Uzbekistan, which has examples of that very architecture, which was incredible to be in those spaces. But generally speaking, I can't go into those spaces. I can't go there. I can't go. And so there's a desire and a longing, and also just a desire for other people to know how rich, the culture is, and how inviting it is. Not just the art history, but the humanity. And it's just so sad that people can't. Sorry.
So I'm bringing up another very heavy topic, but you chose this moment. So the first iteration of the dance platform was 2016. And we all know what happened politically at that time.
2018.
2018.
But
there we go.
By 2015, 16, I was making prototypes. And
So here we are again,
yeah.
2025. What is it about this moment that felt like it was time to revisit this work?
I mean, I feel like I've been in this moment for the last 3 years. So, I mean, in terms of like 2022, there was a lot going on. And 2023, it's been so sad in the world. I mean, so honestly, I'm very sensitive. And a lot of my work has dealt with this feeling of, my paintings have dealt with the angst, like the heaviness of things in the world that I can't control. And I guess the work, though, there's a lot of sense of humor that shines through
For sure.
in the work, but it's a lot of the work, the iconography is constantly responding to these things in the world that I can't control. This was like, I just feel like the last few years and it has been so dark. And, you know, I am so sensitive and, you know, I'm a mother. I, you know, have to show up every day, as we all have to show up every day, you know, going to work and whatever we do in our lives. But I felt like I hit a wall with the place from which my art comes, of the pain, you know, that it comes from. I guess I just couldn't. I needed something more joyful, I think, to be looking to, and also these three platforms are actually. So I'm redoing for this residency. I'm redoing the artwork, the collage layers of 3 platforms that were actually built in 2023, structurally built by Sal Perrone, who's a friend of the museum and an amazing artist in his own right. Sal, I asked him, I said, I actually wanted to build platforms for women, life, freedom, for the protesters that in Iran that were fighting for freedom, and for the ability to dance in the streets. And so I originally made platforms just for that nobody saw, that were just, and I wasn't happy with them. They weren't resolved, but it really got me up and working. And so that was that. And I knew that I wanted to redo the platforms and not necessarily have it be about that. And these are not, you know, I wouldn't title it, you know, give it that same sort of impetus. This is a different iteration of the structure of the platforms, but as you mentioned, you know, there's a feeling of heaviness in the world, and there has been, and I think I have a hard time with the social media. For me, I really struggle with it. I've been completely off of it, and I think there's just a personal desire for using my art as a vehicle for a joyful experience, for, you know, to show, don't tell, you know, an experience of hospitality, to actually create that, you know, I mean, just to create community, right, in real life experience, I just think is so important right now. So.
Yeah. That's a beautiful answer.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. No, it's great. Well, I remember when we initially talked about this, I said, you know what, this is making me think so much about the Beyonce album Renaissance that came out in 2021. It felt like a weird time to have this huge dance record that was an homage to Black queer culture, but it was referred to repeatedly as a plague record because we'd all been shut in our own worlds for so long. It was time to gather again and let it go. So I think that's similar to the invitation that you're putting forward in this work too.
Yeah.
So tell all your friends and come back on February 12th, because that's the intention.
It's such a Persian thing too. I mean, it's a global thing and a universal thing. But I'm thinking about like the holidays that I celebrated growing up, which were ancient pre-Islamic holidays, like the solstice the Yalda and also Nowruz, the Persian New Year, and it's recognizing that there's darkness. There's a season of darkness, but that there's light. Then there's light, and so I think in the art, whether I'm doing dance platforms or taking on more angsty subject matter, there is a balance of light and darkness in it, and so I think I'm trying to channel more light. It's maybe coming from a darkness baseline, but moving towards the light.
So let's get very technical about some of the motifs that you're employing in these platforms and in the work in general.
Yeah.
You're not only, there's like a high-low thing that you're doing that you've always done.
Yeah.
Some of the paintings that you've shown in this space and elsewhere are actually done on styrofoam. You talked about how the platforms are made with LED lights that you can just order on Amazon.
On Amazon, that's what I did, yeah.
I also really like that you're sort of marrying this architectural space with the triptych with these little mini spaces that we have to inhabit as participants. But can you talk about some of the visual motifs that you're using here? And
the architectural motifs that were previously in my paintings in the form of these melting kind of architecture, kind of showing failure or collapse, or is now just this playful kind of space, like a gateway, a portal to a sort of joyful space of light. There's a sun rising that has a monobrow, which is really a real thing, and from ancient Persian culture through the Islamic period. There's known as Khorshid, sun that comes up. It's tons of symbolism, but of course it's universal symbolism, right? In Mexican art, there's the sun. There's the sun in so much art and architecture globally, and you see these kind of dancers that are more abstracted. I mean, this painting is not finished, but it's, I would say, 70% there. But it gives you, I imagined it for this space, and it's a jumping off point that it's enabling me, to create the world and the patterns that I decided to sort of explore in these particular platforms. So it's like a world building experience for me. And there's like moving, the patterns are dynamic and they're moving, and which kind of shows some kind of ikats, the Central Asian and Iranian ikats, kind of blurring of lines and patterns. And there's a shout out to Indian Bollywood dancing as well as Persian dancing, and the bird imagery that's in so many Persian carpets and miniatures and paradise kind of carpets, and the words are freedom and happiness, and so it's creating a kind of joyful architecture and gateway. And in terms of materials, I do want to give a special shout out to a very special artist who was a very important person, kind of, I wouldn't say was an influence, because I met him at a time when I already had all my kind of mission as an artist, and I kind of came to graduate school at SVA late. I was in my early 30s, and I already had my mission. I already had all my influences. I knew, and I just needed the time to make more work, and everyone was like, "You must know Tommy. You must know Tommy's work." And I'd be like, "Who? What do you? Well, like, who's Tommy?" And it wasn't until my second year that I had Tommy Lanigan Schmidt. Thomas Lanigan Schmidt is an incredible artist. His work's been on the cover of Art Forum. They had a retrospective for him at PS1 MoMA a couple of years ago. And it's funny, when he was my teacher at SVA, we had so much to talk about. It was amazing. There were exchanges. I mean, he's such a giving teacher and so humble. He never talked about his work. He was so giving. It wasn't until after he was my teacher that I really got to know his work and him. I mean, I knew that he was part of Stonewall, but I was painting on trash, like just being in New York City. I think it's such a common experience to just, you see something on the street, and you take it, and and as an artist, I think it's very common for artists to use, and of course, as a teenager, I loved Basquiat, and he was doing that with palettes, and so I'd been doing that since my early 20s, But Tommy's just like the work with his materials is so special. I mean, just the way in which he uses candy wrappers, like Easter candy and cellophane and tape, and just by whatever means necessary, he makes these beautiful works. For him, like his version of the Persian inspiration that deeply touches him is what he saw in the sort of Catholic churches when he grew up in Jersey. So he's also from Jersey.
Interesting.
And flamboyance is a big part of his work, and his Byzantine is his obsession, whereas my Persian art gives me my infinite inspiration. And so I would say that this work in particular makes me think of Tommy, even though I literally had the concept of the dance floor before I met Tommy. Like the language was already there. I didn't have I didn't know where to start, how to make and I'm not a collage. My impulse is definitely not to make collages. I'm definitely not a collage artist, and this is collage. And he's a master at collage, and I'm not trying to make work that looks like his at all, but just the permission that he gives and the beauty, and even just as my teacher, he always, he recognized that there's a lot of rawness in my work, which I think there is in his too, but in my work there's a lot of I embrace anger and rawness and kind of a punk kind of sensibility, and I think he always would veer towards the more earnest beauty, and I would say that that's something I would like to channel more in my work, although it's not easy for me because I'm used to being so raw and reactive to negative things. But I'm definitely thinking about Tommy Lanigan-Schmidt in this work, and if you don't know his work, you should look him up.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so.
I think I'll open it up to the audience. We're at a good place to ask some questions. So does anybody have any for Negar? Or do we have questions virtually, perhaps? No? I don't know if that's something we can do. Audience? Anyone? I will just say, I'll ask really quick, what is your future ambition? I know that you mentioned this, and I'm actually putting this out to the universe on your behalf. So what is your ambition for this platform project moving forward? Once we are done with the event on the 12th of February, don't forget.
Yeah. I don't know how much detail I should go into the next visions, but maybe just generally, I mean, my comfort zone is just painting alone, right? And painting angsty paintings alone, but there's a calling, there's a need to come together and to make hospitable experiences, and so I do feel compelled to make this sort of, photograph this and apply for things that will enable me to scale things up, bigger versions of dance platforms. Certainly like a Paradise Carpet dance platform that's quite big, and Charbagh, four gardens, the Persian Paradise Gardens. I feel like there's a lot that I want to do on a larger scale.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah. He's hoping that we can actualize
This
it.
is
I wonder if we want to
helping me.
talk a little bit about some of the images. If we don't have questions, I don't know if you want to give a quick kind of address to some of the things that we're seeing on the screen here. Can you see?
That's like just architectural sort of, for context, I guess, for people who, if they're not familiar with Iranian architecture, and specifically the architecture that I reference in the, that's a personal picture from 1992 when I was able to go to Iran, and that was the last time I went. So those were from my album, my photo album from 1992.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Oh, the pages of the album.
And that's in Shiraz, and it's kind of a distorted picture. I did not take that. That's pulled from the internet. That's what they call it, the Pink Mosque, and it's inside of a dome.
Great.
Yeah. Oh, there's a question.
A question. Okay.
I get a microphone. You talked about taking that darkness and kind of bringing that into light in your pieces. Could you maybe talk about why you make those color choices and how they're related to the motifs that you use, or if there's an external source for it.
I think it's, I mean, absolutely like a Persian sensibility. I mean, without question. But it's my sense. I mean, I'm not like ever looking to something and copying. I've had such, my first 20, 30 years of my life were so, I was such an observer and such a passionate observer of so much art and culture. And I was lucky to live where I lived, the access to museums and galleries, but also the access to Iranian culture too. And so there's so much, I think, that was inside of me, you know, that soaked in, you know, that was related to Iranian color. But I do think it's both very Persian, but then also just very like, you know, New York City in the 80s and like neon and pop culture and the bright lights of the big city and the, you know, that's, you know, certainly my sensibility hasn't changed much from when I was like 11 or 12. I still, I'm wearing like vintage moon boots that I like what I had when I was a kid. Like I still like the same bright colors, you know. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you talked about making work by yourself. Thank you. So you talked about making work by yourself.
Yeah.
How has the experience been making work here in public?
That's such a good question. It's actually been really great, especially for this project. I don't know how much painting I'm going to actually get to do during this residency. This is like super time consuming for me. I don't know, because I'm still not really used to the process. This is an amazing opportunity for me to, you know, giving me the accountability to engage in a process that I just keep putting off on my own. This is a social process. I mean, just like I'm cutting things. I don't need to be like brooding in a studio. Like I'm cutting shapes just like the toddlers that are cutting I mean, and adults. Like I was saying to you earlier, it's like parallel play. We're all just kind of, you know, cutting shapes and playing with color and playing. And that's what, I mean, I do play in my studio. There is a lot of play and experimentation when I'm alone. And but it's really, you know, there were days this week that it was hard to get here. It was hard to motivate, I will say. And then I arrived, and this place was teeming with babies and like little toddlers, and it was so joyful and such a reminder to, like, you know, keep that sense of play and joy and wonder. So this is the perfect context for this kind of art making. So
Great. Any other questions?
It's not a question, but you represent the Persian culture in like a perfect way. I recently moved here, and
Oh,
I can definitely see that you represent the real actual Persian culture in arts.
That's fantastic.
thank you.
That's so
Thank you
nice.
for saying that. Like I said, I don't aim to represent, you know, but yes, there's a lot of paying tribute in the work and celebrating, and so thank you.
That's great. Well, please remember that the event where you can activate the space and ask Alexa to play a song for you will happen on February 12th at 6:30. Thank you so much for all of you for attending, virtually for attending, and for sharing so much of yourself with us today. Thank you, Negar.
Thanks, Annabelle.